All right, we're doing today's session with Beef Arcus 26. The situation we're studying today is flop gets checked around, we bluff the turn, they don't fold. What do we do on the river? Let's go ahead and start with the first hand.
Okay, first hand, I'm in the small blind race. He calls. I don't see bet, maybe I should. But yeah, it's kind of connected, like a little bit. But I didn't see bet, he checks, and I bluff the turn, he calls, and now comes the river. Well, what to do? I'm not sure if to bluff with 9-5 now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I gave him like some range that I think he would call the turn with, and some range I think he would call the river with, and it comes like, yeah, about 360 combos on the turn and like 200 combos on the river. So if I bet like 3/4 on the river, I think it's profitable still. But my ranges might be wrong, obviously.
Let's talk about this spot. So we're out of position, he's in position. The average reg will fold around half the time on the river. That's just based upon population analysis, actually your guys' databases. And so taking nothing into consideration, no board texture, no opponent tendencies, we will get enough folds just based upon that. Now in terms of this type of board texture, this is one of the worst board textures for us. Paired flops tend to get the lowest folds both in and out of position, so that takes away from bluffing a little bit. And then when draws miss, that can hurt us in some situations. I think it's close here. But I do think in like the list of possible situations, this is, you know, one of the worst situations, and I would probably not bet here. I mean, you're repping so little here. I don't think you get folds out of ace high, because he's just not going to think that you are value betting super thin, which, you know, if we can't bluff here, we should be value betting a really thin. But yeah, this is one of the worst spots. So I would give this up, but it wouldn't be, it's close. It wouldn't be a terrible bet. So now on the river, on your combos, you're not giving him credit for calling a lot of the ace X's?
Well, I thought that he like, yeah, he might fold the ace X hand like ace highs, but yeah, it's just assumptions.
Yeah, I think that is a bit optimistic, quite a bit optimistic. I mean, you know, maybe give him half. I mean, I never like to do anything 100% either yes or no.
Right.
But yeah, I would give him at least half. And see, we have no data on this guy, and a lot of times I'll look at their fold river frequency, the fourth line, the last number, and I'll say like a fold river of like, you know, 65%. Okay, he's probably going to fold his ace highs. He's just going to think that you slow played something and now you're going for value. Fold river of 55, I would give him a lot of those ace highs, and I think that changes your decision. That alone, that shift would change your decision.
Right. Yeah, so if he calls like ace highs, it's definitely a fold then.
Yeah, it's just a question if he does or doesn't.
So, but you said like paired flops, it's not really good to like go bluff turn and the river?
For reasons I'm not quite sure of yet, that is the worst board texture. That's the board texture that gets the least amount of folds. I think on paired board textures, players tend to give up a little bit more on the flop and turn, and so by the time they get to the river, they have a made hand more frequently, or just in general, they believe you less frequently. Because of the board being paired on the flop. It's one of the two, and probably a mix of the two, but it's not ready to present to you guys yet, but I've been working on the population analysis, and that was one of the things that really jumped out, how the flop being paired changes river fold frequencies in a number of different situations, and I'll see if I can figure out more about that, but I think it's a mix of those two. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so I bluffed, and he called, and he had like king.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. I thought he might like bet the flop with the king, but obviously he didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. You can at least give him some of those combos that would have bet themselves.
Yeah. Okay. So we can go to the next hand or
Sure.
questions.
Yeah, no questions.
Okay. So we are on the button, queen 10, he calls, I don't see bet, board is not really good for me, I think. And he checks, I bet the turn, he calls, and now it's the question if or not to bluff the river. So let's scroll this down. Right, I gave you some combos that I think he calls on the turn and he calls on the river. So I think I might be wrapping some flush draws here quite a lot. Like in my betting turn, I might have like flush draw, then I bet the river with the mate flush. So I think I can wrap that a lot here.
Absolutely.
So that's probably the main reason for me to bet the river.
Yeah, you've got things you can represent. You've got a backdoor flush draw. You've got the turn ace. And on top of that, limited sample size, but we've got a fold river of 80%. So if anything was close, that fold river would put us over the edge. But even without a fold river like this, you will get enough folds. Out of position, and I just told you that our opponent's out of position, correct?
Yeah, he's in the big blind.
So I told you that the average opponent, when in position, will fold 50%. When they're out of position, the average opponent will fold around 60%. So we get significantly larger number of folds. And so when you're in position in the spot, you would need to see something really, really convincing. Like the combos are clearly not in your favor. Your opponent is very sticky. The board texture is one of the worst board textures. In order for you to not bluff, average fold frequencies are just too high. You've got tons of things going for you here. Absolutely, it's a bet.
Okay, and so you say they're folding like 50% of the time, like population tendencies are like that. So we can basically, if they check the flop, we can basically bet all the time the turn and the river.
You
and be
could.
still profitable.
Yes, you could close your eyes and just bet, and in fact, that's what I usually tell people. That's your default line, bet here, because once the flop gets checked around and you bet the turn, average fold frequencies, depending on the spot, but are usually between 50 and 65%. And a lot of spots are upwards to 60, and it's one of the odd spots in the game. In fact, it's the only spot in the game where you get over 50% fold to both moves. So yes, as a default, I would say bet here, but you know, if the situation is, you know, exceptionally bad like the first hand, it's okay to check. But yeah, as a default, unless you can see something really strong, I think you've got to bet these spots. They just fold way too much.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, and if I could speak to the psychology of this spot.
Okay.
It surprises me a little bit when I do the population analysis and I see them folding so much on the river, because you've checked the flop. You've basically said, I probably don't have a hand, but maybe I'm trapping some, and then you bet the turn, and they call. They're saying, I've got a hand. I don't think you've got a better hand, so I'm calling. And so psychologically, it's tough to bet. It's tough to bluff again because you feel like they know you don't have a hand. They have a hand. But I think that kind of works like some second level type thinking is once you bet the second time, they will convince themselves often enough that you would not bluff again, that they go ahead and give up some value. And don't forget all the times they had something like, you know, some sort of gutter or draw that missed. But in the end, they do end up folding over half the time. And just don't, if any of you have trouble bluffing in the spot, don't psych yourself out here because the population analysis is really strong that they do fold. We had a question, Louise?
Yeah, I hear that you suggest doing this love part of the time. So I want to know if doing this higher is okay, like doing on 50 NL and 100 NL.
That's a good question, and I should temper my comments a little bit. As you get higher, you've got to be a little bit more selective. You've got to pay a little bit more attention to what your opponents are doing, how sticky they are. But I still use the same default strategy at the mid-stakes. Now, am I bluffing 100% of the time on the river? No, but I am bluffing about 65% of the time in this spot on the river. So even at the mid-stakes, and I still get 50% folds at 400 no limit, 600 no limit. I do database analysis for a lot of mid-stakes, even high-stakes players, and they're all getting folds in the lower 50s in these spots. Even though their opponents should be better balanced, they should be able to pick up on that heavy bluffing frequency. They don't. And so, yes, be a little bit more careful, but don't psych yourself out too much. And if you have any doubts, you can do some population analysis on your own. Set up an opponent alias, add in some opponents that play full stack, put them in a group, and put them in the situation, and just see how often they fold. But I guarantee you that if you have enough hands, that you'll find that they're folding in the low 50s at least, and it just doesn't move off that regardless of stakes. Maybe super, super high, but not at stakes we need to worry about. Okay?
Yeah, but what about position? I mean, on this hand, he's checking twice, but if he were on position, he just one check.
Yeah, when we're in position, we want to be relentless. I mean, that's a spot where we really don't want to miss because we're getting, in the lower stakes games, around 60% folds. Now, when our opponent is in position, when we're out of position, we do need to be a little bit more selective because you're right. When he's out of position, he's checked twice, and he's just going to end up folding more often. But still, both fold frequencies are clearly exploitable to anything under a pot-sized bet. And obviously, we're not going anywhere near pot when we're bluffing here. So, yes, be more selective when they are in position, but don't get too tight.
Okay, clear.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question on my own. Let's say I'm out of position, and he is the aggressor. I'm in the big blind and he is in the button, and he checks. I check the flop. He checks the flop. Do I bet turn and the river as well?
There's very little difference in that type of spot and something like a delayed c-bet plus river bluff type of spot in terms of how our opponents fold. The biggest difference is just position, in and out of position. Those have some differences, but yeah, that's the situation doesn't make much difference. It's just the flop was checked. Now you're betting the turn. Now you're betting the river. That's all that matters.
Okay, so it's basically the same stuff.
It really is.
Okay, let's move on then.
Yes.
Next hand. It's basically like this hand here. Okay, now he checks. I bet my semi-bluff. He calls. I miss. And I bet. So do I bet or do I not? I think it's a good spot to bet because of the possible flush, possible straights. King completes some straights. Kings is a lot in my range. I have a lot of queens in my range, even tens. I can rep a lot here, I think. And since he checked the flop, I don't think he has any flushes or any made flushes or any flush draws. I think he would continue with that. And I think he would continue with queens and probably tens, jacks. Aces, kings, definitely he would see bet. So I gave him range like mostly pocket pairs, like lower than tens, and some sevens. And I think that's possibly all he can have. Or is a reggish guy. I don't think he has some random stuff there. So
Yeah.
that's why I think, yeah, I'm listening.
Yeah, his fold river is a little low, 50%, so we want to be a little generous with what he's going to defend with. Now, what we're seeing here on the screen, this is what he would have checked the flop and called the turn with. Yeah, I think, though, that he would have a lot of ace of diamonds here. A single ace of diamonds.
You think he wouldn't see bet with ace of diamond?
I mean, he has, I'm not saying 100%, but I think there would be some. Although he does see bet a lot,
Okay.
doesn't he? 67 and 60.
He see bet a lot, like 60% in position, so.
Yeah, okay, I take that back. I take that back. Maybe some, but yeah, he probably would have fired those on the flop. Okay, yeah, that looks pretty reasonable. Yeah. Yeah, and so everything that I know about average fold frequencies here, you know, just goes back to everything we've been talking about. He should be folding enough here, and I assume you've got enough combos here for him to fold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I think so.
Yeah, I agree.
I think he would fold like everything lower than sevens, even sevens, or maybe tens.
Yeah, I agree.
I think he wouldn't call like. So basically, this topic is like it's gonna be like all the same, like bet then.
It is, but there can be some different situations, some different considerations. Okay. Like the first one was different, but yeah, when I saw the topic, I was like, okay, I can tell them like in 5 minutes what I think about this spot. But there's some things to flesh out here, and there's some spots where we don't bet. Hassan, you got a question? Hassan?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
So on the turn, this student bets half pot.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all right?
Yeah, I think that's all right for the initial bet. I don't think bluffing bet sizing is kind of tricky. I think there's a lot of flexibility in bluff sizing. I think half pot's fine. I think a little bit larger is fine. I didn't comment on this yet, but I thought the river sizing was probably a little bit on the large side, but yeah, 160 into 180. I think you can get away with like 140 into 180. If anything, 160 can, I mean, it makes you look like you're going for value, but it also can look like you're trying to get a fold. I think you get away with 140 here, 135, something like that pretty easily. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
No problem.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Let's move on to the next hand then. I think he folded.
Yep.
Yep.
And there's so many things you can rep there. Yep. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm in the button. I check the flop and I fire the turn. He calls, and now the same. The flush completes, the sum straight completes. Let's move this a bit lower. Yeah. So basically this is what I think he would call on the river.
Mm-hmm.
That's my assumption. So on the 10 he might have like lots of flush draws as well, but then I narrowed it down on the river, so it's not so many of them because he can have like jacks of spades and 9 of spades, 8 of spades. So, but he can have a lot of random stuff as he's like short stack. He might be playing anything. I don't know anything about him.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. When the flush completes on the river, when the flop flush completes on the river, it doesn't really have an impact on their fold frequencies. It's slightly below average, but just like 1 or 2%. So that, but that is a worry. But I think a lot of the times when they have the flush draw themselves, they're going to bet it because they want you to fold out your better hands. And so I think that makes the flush getting there less important in terms of them having a better hand. Now, we also have a tough time making a case that we have the flush, but again, they will fold enough. And one other point is once an opponent, in this particular situation where a blind is called or open, and we check, they check, they check, we miss a c-bet, that's one of the highest fold frequency spots. Once they've checked a second time out of position on the turn, that's a spot where they're folding a solid 60% of the time. But they're still folding on the river. But yeah, you got to take advantage of it on the turn. Yeah, I would follow through on the river.
Mm-hmm. Do you think if they out of position and they complete the flush, they fire more often, like donk to us, or
that also.
they just?
Yeah, regs when their flush completes, when they're out of position and their flush or straight completes, they don't lead out always, but a decent percentage of the time they'll lead out. So we got the turn where they're going to bet the turn with a flush draw a lot to get us to fold an ace high or whatever better hand we have, unpaired hand that we have. And then, yeah, if they did check call, yeah, they're going to lead that river. I don't really have a number on it, a third of the time, maybe as much as half the time. So yeah, that additionally cuts out those combos. But like I said, population analysis, the flush completing really has little effect on their fold frequency.
Okay. So yeah, I did bet and he folded. Okay, let's move on. So flops check check, bet the turn, and now I bet the river. It's pretty much the same.
Yeah, one of the things I like about this board texture is it's easier for you to rep a hand on this type of board, I think, because a lot of players will be checking ace highs, pocket queens, queen jack. In this particular situation, it's a more trappy board texture. And when you bet twice, yeah, he's going to have a hand with some decent frequency, but you can also represent something here. Yeah, I like the bluff.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't give him any aces because I should have given him some aces because he can like check back the ace on the flop, but I think he would bet the ace a lot of times as well on the flop.
That's a fairly wet board. He's going to want to protect a fairly high frequency. Sure, you can give him some.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he'd protect his hand.
Yeah, so that's why I should give him some, but not a lot. Definitely not a lot.
Yeah, one thing I always tell people when you're doing this type of analysis is never say something's 100% of the time. Almost nothing's 100%. Always throw in a few combos that they didn't bet the ace, a few combos like in the last situation, they had a flush draw and they got to the river with it. You're guessing as to how many combos are there, but at least you're repping some. And so if there's enough to change your decision, or at least if it pushes your decision close, and you can kind of decide from there, or you'll at least see from there that, oh, okay, if he's doing this a lot more, if he's checking a lot of aces here, this changes the whole texture of the hand. It changes the decision. I'm not saying that would be the case, but you can start to see how much it changes things. And maybe you have a read on a player that he checks a lot of aces, or he has very low bet versus a missed c-bet type of stat, and so you assume from that he is checking a lot of aces. Yeah, that can help you make some better decisions once you know the impact of that. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so I did bet the river and he raised, so I folded. I was wondering what he could have there, like some 2-pair combos probably, or maybe king 10.
Yeah, I think it's the nuts.
Yeah.
Maybe, but he would have to be worried about you having king 10. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I don't think he's bluffing, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's definitely not bluffing. Yeah, and I think the river bet was still good.
Absolutely. Yep.
I don't know about the bet sizing, but
I like the sizing.
Two is fine.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in whole numbers, so I'd be wanting to bet around 2 here, and so I would just go slightly over 2. It just looks a little bit stronger than, say, like 195. Yeah, I like the sizing.
Okay.